So today is a Hope Lives morning. And I guess my opening question to you is, how many of us know what that is supposed to mean? What is a Hope Lives morning? Why do we have them? What are we supposed to do on them? And come to think of it, there's other phrases that we use in our Southridge speak, phrases like anchor cause or missional living, that I'm similarly wondering if we know what they actually mean. And more importantly, if we understand what difference they're supposed to make in our lives, your life, my life, and ours together. Well, what we want to do today in this Hope Lives morning is explain some of that, explain why it is that we use these kind of phrases, why they matter, why we value them, and what we're inviting people into. And at the end of the day, you might be surprised to learn that all of that has to do, kind of in a bottom line way, all of that has to do with the way that we actually understand the word church. So think about how you understand the word church and compare that to how we think about it. See, from the very beginning, I think we appreciate that Jesus is not only the head, but the creator, the inventor of his church. We see this as he interacts with one of his first followers named Peter, Matthew 16 and verse 18, where he says, on this rock, the word rock was the name Peter. Peter meant rock. So he says, on this rock, meaning on this Peter, Jesus says, I will build my church. I will build my church. And he declares to Peter and to other Peters like him, people who in the context of this verse are recognizing the Savior sent from God that Jesus is. He says, on people like this, followers of his, he will build his church. And what's interesting is when he uses the word church, he doesn't use a brand new word. This isn't a word that Jesus made up. It was a word common in his day. In the Greek, the word translated as church is the word ecclesia. And the word ecclesia simply means assembly. So Jesus is saying to Peter, on this rock, on this Peter, I will build my assembly. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. The word assembly, if you stop and think about it, actually has two different usages. Two different meanings of the word assembly. On the one hand, the word assembly refers to the convening of people together, like a school assembly for Remembrance Day or the assembly of Parliament. At the same time, the word assembly can be referred to the putting together of parts to form a single unit, like the assembly line for a car, or the assembly of Lego into the Millennium Falcon, or some cool toy that I never had when I was growing up. There are two definitions or two usages of the word assembly. Assembly referring to the gathering of people, and the assembly referring to putting together something to become an entity. And if you think about what Jesus is saying to Peter when he says that he'll build his church, he'll build his assembly, not convene or gather his assembly. The question is, which of those versions of the word assembly do you think Jesus had in mind? And more specifically, if Jesus was leaning toward the putting together of parts to create an entity, what is that entity that he intended to create with parts like people like Peter? What was the entity that Jesus was ultimately trying to put together? Well, again, let's try to reduce this down to its simplest form and start with the most baseline reality spiritually, and that is that God, more than anything, God is love. 1 John 4:8 says that God is love, not that God is a set of truths or tenets of faith, or that God is loving on occasion or when he's in the mood. Core to the essence and nature of God is that God, more than anything, is love. Love is who God is and what God is all about. That's relevant because when it comes to Jesus, one of the things that Jesus came to do was to reveal what God was like, to display God and God's essence in human form. Colossians 1:15 says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, that Jesus came to physically kind of manifest the essence and nature and heart of God in human form. Jesus came to bring the invisible and spiritual into the tangible and real. And so it shouldn't surprise us that if God is love and Jesus came to reveal God, that Jesus came to embody and show us what that perfect love looked like. That Jesus came to put love on display, not just to teach or to lecture on love, even though he did that in many of his parables and certainly in his instructions on things like the greatest commandment. But more than that, Jesus came to embody this perfect love, which in Jesus' clarity was a specific kind of love, not just kind of a hippie love, man, where Jesus was just an easygoing guy and got along with everyone and didn't ever upset anyone. Jesus actually described at the very beginning, the very onset of his public ministry, what his life and what this love would look like by reading a scroll in the temple of an Old Testament text. And then at the end of the reading of the scroll, he declared to the people in the temple that this scripture had been fulfilled in their midst, implying through his life. And that scroll reading is recorded in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." See, Jesus' version of love was very specific, very concrete, very practical and gritty. Jesus' love centered a kind of people that society typically marginalized in hopes of excluding. And instead, what Jesus came to earth to demonstrate was a kind of love that was sacrificial, that was self-emptying, that was privilege leveraging for those of less privilege, and often served to comfort the afflicted to the affliction of the comfortable. If you read any of the biographical accounts of Jesus' life, that's the kind of love you see on display, the kind of love that brought to life the Father's love, because God is love. And so the question is, when Jesus invites people to follow him, to be his disciple, to apprentice under him, to learn of him in order to live like him, and what he's trying to do is embody the very essence of God, who is perfect love, when he says to those disciples like Peter, "I want to build my assembly," and the word assembly is more referring to the piecing of together into an entity, what is this entity that Jesus is trying to piece his followers and apprentices and disciples to become? Well, on the one hand, it shouldn't surprise us that he's inviting people who are seeking to live like him to live like him together in a community. That's why we often refer to the church as the body of Christ, because collectively we then can represent and resemble Jesus better together than if we could alone. But if the purpose of the church is to resemble Jesus collectively, and Jesus came to display what God is like, and God is love, then it shouldn't surprise us that there's a point to all of this. Look what it says in Ephesians chapter 4, referring to the church as a body. It says that Jesus makes this whole body fit together perfectly, meaning Jesus is doing the assembling. And as each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and what? And full of love. The whole point of being a body, the whole point of believers coming together to be a community, the whole point of what Jesus is assembling is that through assembling followers of his together, we could reveal who he is to the watching world to a greater degree together than we could alone. But in revealing him who came to reveal God, who is perfect love, that we together would be fit together to become that love that reveals the essence of Jesus and reveals the heart of God. And so for us here at Southridge, that in a summative way is how we understand this word church. The word church, literally meaning assembly, isn't necessarily the convening of people for a gathering. The word church, if it's assembling people to fit together to become something, it simply is followers of Jesus being fit together to become love. That followers of Jesus are being assembled, they're being churched by Jesus together to become this entity that reveals him, which ultimately reveals love, and not just any kind of love, Jesus' gritty, specific kind of love, the kind of love that he displayed on the cross. That self-emptying, sacrificial, privilege relinquishing for the less privileged kind of love that comforted particularly the afflicted, often to the affliction of the comfortable. That's what we understand the church is intended to be. A group of followers of Jesus fit together to become that kind of love. Well, I'll say, if you understand that, if you understand that Jesus' vision of church as assembly is not convening a gathering, but fitting together for something. And if you understand that something is fitting together for love, and if you understand that love is not a generic love, but a specific kind of love that centers the kind of people that Jesus most centered, well, it then changes everything. Because with that different definition comes a whole different direction, not just for your life as part of a church, but for the church itself. And we've certainly experienced that around here. When I first got involved in ministry as a vocation, I didn't understand the church that way. Like many of you, I probably understood faith as synonymous with church going. And so without having that sophistication of language, I probably understood the church as a gathering that you convene. That's probably how I understood what an assembly was. And for me and my buddies who started out in the mid-90s, we tried to have the best possible assembly, meaning gathering or convening of gathering, that we could. And for a while, it felt like we were doing really well at that. We were growing like 35, 40% numerically year over year over year. We were doubling every 18 months. And if you looked on the outside, you probably thought that we were doing really well as church leaders leading this church. But all the while, as we started to understand in a greater depth and greater clarity, Jesus' true vision for who he intended followers of his to become together as his church, we started to wonder if maybe we weren't a little bit off, if not way off. And for a while there, we actually felt like, where other people might have thought we were a great church, we were wondering whether we were even a church at all, according to what we really understood was Jesus' definition for church in his assembly. And so, in the early 2000s, we made the drastic shift to relocate our church facility and location. We relocated our community to just outside the downtown core of the city of St. Catharines, where our St. Catharines location is today. Many people, I'm sure, assumed that we were doing that for gathering reasons, but we tried to be clear that we were doing that to put ourselves in proximity to the kind of people that Jesus most centered, the kind of people who were in greatest need in our society. Where soon after that, a year and a half or so after that, we opened what continues today to be a 24/7, 365-day-a-year homeless shelter within our church locations facilities in order to foster that kind of love as a community. Fast forward a few years later when we decided to become a multi-site church, one church in multiple locations in Niagara. And again, I'm sure people thought that we were doing that for purposes of gathering. Maybe shortening the drive time for people who had further drives to our St. Catharines location. But again, what we tried to be clear about was that we were trying to replicate what we called shelter equivalents in other parts of Niagara to meet and serve and cultivate love with other people groups that Jesus would have centered if he were here in Niagara these days. And so now we call those shelter equivalent initiatives our anchor causes. They define why our Southridge locations exist. And if you don't think that's drastic enough, think about the last 2 decades or so from even just a financial perspective, where when I started in ministry, you looked through our operating budget and there literally were $0 devoted to fostering any kind of compassion or justice activity among us whatsoever. Where today, our budget in the last few years has invested north of 80% of the dollars that we spend into our anchor cause activity across our 3 locations. From 0% to 80%, that's a drastic shift in focus. It's a drastic shift in direction because of a drastic shift in definition. And I hope that you can appreciate that today. Why we're Southridge in the first place, why we moved, why we opened a homeless shelter, why we tried to replicate that in other locations, why we have anchor causes, and why we steward so many resources disproportionately into cultivating a way of life centered on those anchor causes, because of the definition that we understand Jesus to have invented church to be the assembly of people together to become love. Think about it as another example, our Vineland location that we launched a bunch of years ago when we partnered with a church in that area to become love. To do that, right away, we formed kind of an adopt a farm program with our life groups from Southridge to adopt local farms of Caribbean workers to start to build friendships and cultivate community. And out of that, some social activities emerged. I understand that the cricket nights and the dominoes tournaments have been the biggest hits over the years. But it didn't stop there. As those friendships formed and we began to cultivate loving relationships, our love could deepen and strengthen. And soon we were opening a fully functioning medical clinic, or opening a thrift shop, or opening a room to offer legal supports, or a lounge area to socialize. And again and again and again, we've taken steps in a specific direction, because your definition determines your direction. How you define church determines the direction of your church. And that's how things have worked in our community across all 3 of our locations. Now, if you're stopping and thinking about this for a second, you might be asking, if this is our definition of church, assembling together for love, not convening gatherings, then you might be wondering what it is that we're doing convening a gathering right here and right now. And that's not just a good question, that's a great question, because it probably points to the single greatest confusion and the single greatest challenge that I believe we face as a church these days, is trying to differentiate the reasons why we do those 2 things, if one, not both, is our definition and understanding of church. We'll appreciate that when we look to the scriptures and we see in the New Testament the first century followers of Jesus who were clear on Jesus' vision to be fit together to become love, when we see them function as a church, they gathered like we are right now. They gathered, in fact, more frequently than we do. The book of Acts says that they gathered in the temple every single day. And so gathering together was important. The question, though, is why? Why was their gathering important if gathering wasn't the definition of assembly that Jesus had in mind? Well, look at what it says in Hebrews chapter 10, where it says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, by not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." Do you see why gatherings are so important and why not neglecting meeting together is so important? The scriptures say because of the way that it encourages the vision of Jesus to be the church. Not because it is the church, but because of the way it spurs us on and helps us spur each other on to the kinds of love and good deeds that Jesus wants to assemble us together to be as his church. And so gatherings are important, but gatherings are not the assembly. They encourage and spur on us to become the assembly. I hope that you can reconcile that, because, Marshall McLuhan said that the medium is the message. And we've recognized over the years that simply the medium of gathering, of getting together in this way, Sunday after Sunday, can kind of reinforce that church goer, NFL game day type of approach to what it means to be the church. And it can get really confusing. We've recognized this as a leadership when, we start a gathering with a welcome video that says, "Welcome to Southridge. We're glad you're here," implying that here is the church. Or the way that we close a service by saying, "See you next week," implying that next week is the next time we should engage and get together as a church. Or when we reward attendance by greeting newcomers and saying, "Hey, we've got a free gift for you as a thanks for attending," like we're trying to reinforce attending. All of those behaviors as mediums that kind of are the message can tempt us to reinforce a false definition of what we understand the church to be and devolve us back to an understanding of church just as gathering, not as piecing together to become love. Let's get back to our Vineland location again as an example. We've been battling this for years because the love that Jesus has been piecing us together to become there, for the most part, has happened outside of our Sunday morning gatherings, especially because our Caribbean working friends are working and can't be part of our gatherings. And so we've recognized for the last number of years that if you only related to us as a community in our Sunday morning gatherings at Vineland, you might have no idea the kind of church that we're purposing to be, or the kind of vision of church that we're aspiring to not only define, but move in the direction of. And so in the last few years, our leaders there have made the risky and I think kind of courageous decision to experiment with canceling our Sunday morning gatherings and instead convening gatherings of our whole community on certain Sunday evenings, including our Caribbean friends that we've become community with. And over the years, those gatherings on Sunday evenings have been able to increase in frequency, where we've canceled more Sunday mornings and had more Sunday evenings. This past year, we've had one a month for the entire calendar year, even during the winter, just to keep the rhythm going. And in the last year or two, we've tried to, again, make tweaks and directional changes to try to make sure that those Sunday evenings, even though they're getting close to little kids' bedtimes, are family friendly and conducive for kids, for parents, even of young kids, so that our whole church family can participate. And I'll tell you, at last month's evening gathering of our Vineland location, it was the first time that I got to be part of one of these for a number of years. And it literally took my breath away. Joining in to the meals and seeing the conversations happening in the lobbies and in the lounge areas, and then seeing the thrift store and the legal supports and the medical clinics all buzzing. It was incredible. And yes, there was a worship gathering that took part as part of this whole system of this Canadian Caribbean Center that was happening that night. But the cool thing about the worship gathering is that it was doing the very thing that a worship gathering is intended to do. It was encouraging and stimulating the way of life of love that we were all experiencing together that evening. And it takes my breath away because it really was a glimpse of what we describe around here as Southridge at our best. A lot like a Friday night at Harvest Kitchen in Welland, or a Thanksgiving or a Christmas community dinner in our St. Catharines locations. Not because people have been assembled, but because of the way of life of love that's being fit together so beautifully in environments like that. We say that those are Southridge at our best because they're the closest thing to that bullseye of what we understand Jesus' vision of his church, assembling followers of Jesus together to love, actually looks like. And today, we're hoping that you would understand that. And in understanding that, we hope that you would join in and be part of that. That's what we want our gatherings to be and to do, to stimulate and encourage people in that direction, according to that definition. And frankly, that's what our Hope Lives services every season or so are specifically designed to do, to give us a fresh reminder and a fresh recalibration of this way of life of love that we're invited into, not just personally, but collectively together as a community, as a family, as Jesus pieces us together for love and fulfills his vision of church among us. Lately we've been trying to make improvements to providing that kind of clarity, specifically around how people can join into our Anchor Cause activity. And we've started to get real clear on the 4 different stages of participating in our Anchor Causes: the invitation, the orientation, the facilitation through participation, and then the reflection coming out of those experiences, reflecting on what Jesus did and how he changed you and grew you in the direction of love through them. Invitation, orientation, facilitation, and reflection. And for today, what we're trying to improve is the first move from invitation, which hopefully we're casting clearly today, to orientation, where the one action step I hope every single one of us takes today, especially if we haven't participated in our Anchor Cause activity yet in our particular Southridge location, is to attend the orientation being offered for your Anchor Cause at your location. You'll see all the dates on the screen, including a few new experimental orientations for family and kid-friendly versions that we're going to experiment with and offer at our St. Catharines location in the coming weeks. The bottom line is we want you all to be part of this as our church because of the way that we understand the word church. We understand the word church as Jesus' assembly, but assembly not as the convening of a gathering, but as the piecing together to become love, where gatherings like this can encourage and drive us toward, recognizing that our definition determines our direction, and we hope that you'll join in that direction with us today. To give you a little bit more inspiration and maybe example of what this can look like, as we close, we're going to show you a video of some people who've taken advantage of that invitation and joined in and are actively participating in the Anchor Cause activity of your location. And as you hear their stories and the way that Jesus is not only changing them, but piecing them together to become love, consider what it would take for you to take that next step, specifically of attending that orientation so you can get launched into that as well. Bottom line for us is we believe that Jesus' vision for his church is piecing together his followers to become love, piecing people together to become this beautiful picture of Jesus' love, a sacrificial, a selfless, a cross-carrying kind of love that centers the kind of people that Jesus most centered. And when it comes to Jesus piecing people together to do that, our hope and prayer today is that those people include you. So check out this video and be inspired to join in.